In Chapter 8, we continue our discussion of economic growth with a discussion of one of the most famous models of economic growth, the Solow model, named after Robert Solow, Nobel Prize winning economist. Let me start by saying I'm not particularly concerned in this chapter if you memorize and learn all the sort of mathematical and graphical details of the Solow model. It's nice if you can do it, but what I'm much more concerned about is sort of understanding the several big ideas that the model throws out there. I'm going to try to cover those in this lecture and not worry about, again, the details about the graphical and algebraic details. So you can, if you're comfortable in that mode, you should take a look at that and learn it. But I think, for me, the key is understanding the big message here. And one of the big messages is the difference that he has between what we call catch-up growth and cutting-edge growth. And so first we can talk about catch-up growth. And the idea behind catch-up growth is sort of, when we look at economic growth rates, we might notice things like, well, for example, the United States in 2010 grew at 2.2%, but China grew at 10%, right? At 10%. So is China richer than we are? Are they doing better? Well, remember, these are growth rates. These are the rate at which growth is happening. They're not levels of wealth or levels of GDP. They're growth rates. And as the textbook points out, the reason why China is growing so much faster is, one, we've already grown so much. We're on what we might call the cutting edge. Well, China, by contrast, is catching up, right? It's catching up to where the Western economies are, the higher growth economies are. So that's key to this story, right? Is this difference between on the cutting edge, having sort of done a lot of growth, and now you're sort of pushing forward that last little bit, versus trying to catch up to where everyone else is. And one of the best ways to think about this is that one of the reasons we see these high growth rates in catching up countries is they're able to take advantage of what we would call low-hanging fruit, right? The gains from early growth are much greater and much easier to obtain than from later growth. As we know from our earlier chapters, we do the most valuable things first, right? So countries that are catching up with growth are able to take advantage of that and sort of do the things that generate lots of growth very quickly. But eventually, right, they can't do that forever. And we'll talk about why that is in just a few minutes. But they can't do that forever. Eventually you run out of low-hanging fruit, and you got to start climbing up the tree to get the stuff that's a little more difficult to obtain. So I think that's a really important thing to understand at the beginning, right, is that distinction, right? Catch-up growth, as the book points out, happens because we accumulate capital, and we sort of, again, have the technology and all that kind of stuff to do things. But cutting-edge growth, where the United States is, happens because of new ideas, and we'll explore that in just a few minutes. So again, as I said, I'm not going to worry too much about the particulars of the Solow model, okay? What I do want to talk about, though, is the idea of depreciation and the relationship between investment and depreciation, because this is important for understanding not just economic growth, but for understanding decisions that firms make and so on. So one of the things we have to understand is that capital wears out. Machines wear out. Even human capital wears out. We go back to school, we get retrained, right? We learn new things and so forth, okay? So some fraction of capital wears out every year. Okay, and that has to be replaced. And the greater the capital stock, that is, the more capital you have, the greater the depreciation. And depreciation puts a constraint on growth, again, because you have to devote part of your resources to maintaining that capital, right? You have to sort of overcoming that depreciation, replacing worn-out machines, and so on. So depreciation is going to be an important factor in figuring out just how much economic growth takes place. In the Solow model, right, we talk about what they call the steady state level of capital. And the steady state level of capital is where investment, that is the creation of new capital, just covers capital depreciation. The capital stock isn't going to grow in this world in steady state level of capital, but it's not going to shrink either. We're just replacing the capital that's wearing out. And so we can think of three different options here. A world in which investment is greater than depreciation, that is, where we're investing in more new capital than we're using, than we're devoting resources to replacing old capital. The capital stock, therefore, is growing on net. We're replacing the old, but we're also generating more new than replacement. And so the capital stock grows, and output next period will be bigger. We can have investment equal to depreciation, as we've talked about. That's the steady state. Capital stock and output are constant, but we can also have a situation where investment is less than depreciation, where a society is unable to replace fully, it's depreciating capital. In this case, the capital stock shrinks and output next period is smaller. I would note, by the way, that this is the situation the United States was in during several years of the Great Depression, where net investment was negative. We were unable to actually replace depreciating capital, and the capital stock of the United States fell during the Great Depression. And we'll talk a little more about that later in the semester. But again, that's the key, right? Is that those three? The question is the relationship between investment and depreciation. Okay, and one of the challenges is as the capital stock gets larger, investment continues to increase, but at a diminishing rate. Depreciation, however, increases with the capital stock at a linear, constant rate. So one of the things that we see happen is that as growth takes place, depreciation is climbing, right? And investment is climbing too, but at a diminishing rate. So eventually, again, those two curves will cross. Investment will equal depreciation. Will hit the steady state level of capital. And that's part of the catching up growth, right? That eventually this process of diminishing returns and the role of depreciation means that eventually capital and output will cease growing. So when we get to that steady state where investment equals depreciation, capital will be at its steady state, and so will output. So we will flatten out. Okay. In general, again, countries that invest more will be wealthier, especially if they're in the catch-up process. What we also want to do, though, is to talk about what happens. What do we mean by cutting-edge growth? Okay, because if we take this model so far seriously, right, eventually everyone seems to head up towards a situation where there's no more growth. But we look at the United States, and we've been growing for more than 200 years, right? So how do you get away from that sort of trap of steady state growth? And the answer is ideas, better ideas. Innovation, I think, is the word I would use, and the fact that say computers are faster, or that we have better ways of growing crops. All of these things are new ideas, right? That have made us more productive without necessarily having more capital or human capital to do it with. So we don't need the investment to make that happen. We need the new ideas to take the investment that we do have and use it more wisely. So that's what we call cutting edge growth. That's how economies like the United States can continue to grow. We can continue to grow because we continue to have new ideas, better ideas that enable us to take the resources that we do have, the investment that we do have, and use it more wisely. Just a few thoughts about the economics of ideas that the textbook discusses. And again, if you have the PowerPoint open, this is slide 45. New ideas for increasing output are primarily research developed and implemented by profit-seeking firms, right? We think in the Indianapolis area, we think about someone like Eli Lilly, right, who is greatly involved in research and generating new ideas, and profit-seeking firms have every reason to want to do that. The other thing about ideas is they can be freely shared, right? They're ideas, but the fact that they spill over this way means that perhaps they're underprovided, right? People who generate new ideas can't capture all the benefits of those new ideas because some of the benefits spill over to other people. If you have a new idea and it gets, other people take advantage of it, right? There's no way to sort of declare a kind of protected property right in that. An interesting question to think about is what role that government might have in improving the production of ideas. Is it patents? Is it supporting fundamental research? What might it be? And finally, the larger the market, the greater the incentive to research and develop new ideas. So there's advantages to having a big growing economy with lots of customers. That means it's more likely that people will generate those new ideas. Institutions matter here too, right? Same thing that we were talking about in the last chapter. If you have good institutions and those institutions generate the right incentives, in particular, if you can turn, the way I would put this, a little different from the way the book says it, what I would say is if you can turn inventions into innovations, that's the secret to economic growth. Coming up with a new idea is easy. Coming up with a new invention, right, is, we can come up with lots of those. The question is, how do we turn those inventions, those new ideas, into something that's truly an innovation that benefits people, that generates economic growth? Having a market economy, a competitive economy is important. Having protection for property rights is important. Having perhaps a high-quality educational system is important. What you need is the institutional infrastructure for not just supporting new ideas, the invention part, but also their commercialization, making it possible for them to go into the marketplace and improve people's lives. And so it's not just a matter of the sort of science smarts that gives us inventions. It's turning those inventions into innovation through the market. That, I think, is the key part of the key process here of making sure about how it is that advanced economies engage in cutting edge growth. Okay. Few last things to think about as we think about the future of economic growth. GDP per capita in the world has been increasing. Okay, in fact, by about 3% per year. One of the things to think about here is that adding population helps this process, right? More people mean more new ideas. One of the things that we get trapped in thinking about is thinking about population growth as a bad thing, because we tend to think about people as consumers, right? As little sort of Pac-Man who go munching and consuming resources. But human beings are, before they're consumers, are producers, and we come up with new ideas, and more people mean more ideas, mean more division of labor, more specialization of knowledge, all the things we've talked about earlier on. So if you want cutting edge growth, you want more new ideas, having more people is a good thing. More population, as long as you've got good institutions, means more growth, not less. And that's the key. You need people, but you also need the right institutions to channel that the productivity and new ideas of people into innovation and into goods and services that improve people's lives. So that's the core of this chapter. And again, as I said, I'm not too concerned that you sort of know all the gory details of the Solow model. There's more things, I think, that I did not talk about in this lecture that you might want to take a look at. But those are the key ideas, that difference between catching up and cutting edge, the role of the relationship between investment and depreciation, the role of new ideas in generating cutting edge growth. Those I think are really the keys. So, and again, as we said in the last couple chapters, economic growth is what it's all about. If we want a better world, we want people to be more equal, to live better, longer, more rich lives, rich in the sense of full and complete. We need economic growth. Economic growth is what makes those things happen.